I'm very honored to be here at Seton Hall to deliver the 4th Annual Monsignor James Cofone Lecture. I want to thank Dr. Merzaku for this invitation, the Center for Catholic Studies, the University Corps, and the Department of Religion for co-sponsoring this lecture. I trust that the encounter of a bishop with a totalitarian ideology and an evil regime fits the Center's mandate of studying the Church's encounter with the world. I'd like to thank Gloria Aranio for organizing the details of my stay here, the priest community for welcoming me, and also for allowing me to stay an extra day so that I can have the opportunity of seeing your pirates seek revenge against Villanova tomorrow. In 1991, I was invited to lunch at a castle in Germany. My host, the owner of the castle, was Count Christoph Bernhard von Galen. I had heard of his uncle, Cardinal Clemens August von Galen, who was known as the Lion of Münster for his outspoken criticisms of the Nazi regime. And I knew something about him, but not very much. I learned a bit more that day, including that there was a process of canonization underway, and he has since been beatified. He's now Blessed Clemens August von Galen. But what struck me most from that meeting was something that Count von Galen told me his uncle had once said to him. We Galans, he said, are not great looking and we're not very smart, but we're brutally Catholic. Wir sind brutal katholisch. An example of his brutal Catholicism is his 3 famous sermons of the summer of 1941. So picture, if you will, a giant of a bishop about 6'6", slowly mounting the pulpit of the Church of St. Lambert in Münster on the 13th of July, 1941. Everything had been going Germany's way in the war, but England was trying to strike back. And for the first time, this had been felt locally. A number of nighttime bombing raids by the Royal Air Force had caused much damage, including to the cathedral, which was unusable this day. 47 people had been killed. The people gathered at St. Lambert's hoped for some words of consolation from their beloved bishop. And he did give them words of fatherly consolation. But they had no idea that the bulk of his sermon was going to be an attack on the Gestapo, the dreaded Nazi secret state police. He drew a brief lesson from the bombing, taking it as a call to return to God. He told the congregation that it had been his plan to elaborate on this lesson, but decided that he had to leave this aside. Instead, he said, I find myself compelled to speak publicly on something else, a shocking event which happened to us yesterday at the end of this week of horror. All Münster still feels the effects of the awful devastation that the foreign enemy inflicted on us during this week. Then, yesterday, at the end of the week, yesterday, on the 12th of July, the secret state police confiscated both houses of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order in our city, Haus St. Maring on the Weselerstrasse and the Ignatius House on the Königstrasse, threw the inhabitants out of their homes and ordered the fathers and brothers immediately on the same day, yesterday, to leave not only their houses, not only our city, but the province of Westphalia and the entire Rhine province. And the same hard fate was inflicted also yesterday on the missionary sisters of the Immaculate Conception in Wilkinghege on Steinfurter Strasse. Their house too was confiscated. The sisters have been ordered out of Westphalia and must leave Münster by 6 o'clock this evening. The attack on the religious orders had come to Westphalia, he told his hearers. It had already come to other parts of Germany and occupied lands. He predicted that more such horrific news could be expected in the days to come. That here also, one convent after another will be confiscated. Its occupants, our brothers and sisters, children of our families, true fellow Germans, will be thrown out into the streets like helots with no rights, chased out of the country like vermin. And all this takes place at this moment when everything shakes and trembles at the prospect of more nightly air raids that could kill us all, that could make any one of us into a homeless refugee, this is the moment that they drive innocent, indeed most worthy men and women, highly esteemed by countless people, out of their humble homes, that they make fellow Germans, our fellow citizens of Münster, into homeless refugees. Why? The bishop asked. He had been given no explanation except state police reasons. None of the fathers, brothers, or sisters had been accused of any crime, and if so, they should be brought before a court. In normal situations, Catholic priests or bishops in Westphalia would not encourage shouts or applause from the congregation during a sermon, but this was not a normal situation. I ask you, Bishop von Galen cried out to the congregation, before whose eyes the Jesuit fathers and the Sisters of the Immaculate Conception have for years led their religious life dedicated solely to the glory of God and the salvation of their fellow men. I ask you, who holds these men and women guilty of a crime deserving punishment? The Gestapo informants in the church reported to their leaders that shouts of no one came from the congregation. Who presumes to make an accusation against them? Again came cries of no one. If anyone does, he added, then let him make his testimony. Not once has the secret state police produced such a witness, to say nothing of a court or the public prosecutor. Now loud jeers came from the people. And thus he began his public attack on the Gestapo, with Gestapo informants listening in, as they always did. But this became more than an attack on the Gestapo. It became an attack on a regime that would allow the Gestapo to exist, that would allow the functioning of a secret police force that could haul people from their homes without warning and imprison them without trial, that could rearrest people who had just completed their prison sentences and put them into concentration camps, that did not have to answer for its actions to an independent judiciary. Now these faithful priests and religious sisters and brothers were being exiled from their homes for no reason other than being members of Catholic religious orders. The bishop also brought to the attention of his congregation other acts of injustice that the regime had undertaken. For example, 2 of his priests whom he had nominated as canons of the cathedral had been exiled from Münster because the regime did not like the fact that he had named them to these positions, even though his right to do so was constitutionally guaranteed. Now his attack on the Gestapo came to full force. In the face of the physical superiority of the secret state police, every German citizen is completely defenseless and unprotected, completely defenseless and unprotected. None of us is certain, no matter whether he knows himself to be the most loyal, conscientious citizen, no matter that he be completely certain of his innocence, that he won't one day be taken from his home, robbed of his freedom, and thrown into the cells and concentration camps of the secret state police. I am certain about this in my own case. That could happen to me today or any day. Since I will then no longer be able to speak openly, today I will speak openly. I want to give a public warning against continuing along a path that I am strongly convinced calls down God's punishment on man and must lead to unhappiness and ruin for our people and our fatherland. This was the first of 3 famous sermons that he gave in the summer of 1941, on the 13th and 20th of July and the 3rd of August. He was consciously putting his freedom and his life at risk in order to defend justice and the rights of the church and the rights of the human person. In this first sermon, he brought things back to fundamental first principles of political philosophy. Any political order has to be based on justice. He cited an ancient maxim, justice is the foundation of states. And he continued illustrating what this entails: the right to life, to inviolability, inviolability to freedom, is an indispensable part of any moral social order. Certainly the state has the authority to curtail these rights by way of punishment, but only in regard to lawbreakers whose guilt has been established by an impartial legal proceeding. The state which oversteps this divinely willed limit and imposes or permits the punishment of the innocent undermines its own authority and the respect for its sovereignty in the minds of the citizens. Blessed Clemens August made of this sermon a kind of formal proclamation. When he became bishop, he had sworn an oath before Hermann Goering, as the representative of the state, to ward off any danger that might threaten the German people. Now he regarded the Gestapo itself and the injustice of the regime that permitted it to operate as the danger threatening the German people. Since none of us knows a way for an independent review of the measures of the secret state police, of their restrictions on liberty, their prohibitions of residence, their arrests, their imprisonment of German citizens in concentration camps, there is already a feeling of a lack of rights, indeed of a cowardly fear in large sectors of the German people, which has seriously damaged the community. The duty of my episcopal rank, the duty of my oath, according to which I swore before God and before the representative of the regime of the Reich to use my energies to ward off any danger that may threaten the German people, force me to make this public warning in the light of the deeds of the secret state police. Bishop von Galen knew that he would be accused of weakening the home front during a time of war. He anticipated the charge and turned it around on the regime and the Gestapo. It is not I who am the cause of any possible weakening of the home front. It is those who, despite the war situation, despite our present necessity, yes, here in Münster at the end of a horrifying week of terrifying enemy attacks, subject innocent people to hard punishments without trial, without possibility of defense, rob our religious, our brothers and sisters of their property, put them on the streets, hunt them out of the province. They destroy the security of rights. They undermine trust in the law. They destroy our trust in the leadership of our country. And so, in the name of all upright German people, in the name of the majesty of justice and the interests of peace and the solidarity of the home front, I lift up my voice in protest. I proclaim loudly as a German man, as an honorable citizen, as a minister of the Christian religion, as a Catholic bishop, we demand justice. If this call remains unheard and unanswered, if the rule of Queen Justice is not restored, then despite the heroism of our soldiers and their glorious victories, our German people and fatherland will perish through inner rottenness and decay. A week later, he returned to the theme. More religious houses had been expropriated. More nuns and brothers and priests had been expelled from their homes. He noted that the male religious communities had brothers and fathers serving at the front as soldiers and chaplains, risking their lives for Germany. And now when they returned to Germany, they would find that their homes had been taken away from them. He sarcastically attacked the bravery of the administration, winning battles against men with no weapons and defenseless women. He told the congregation that he had written letters to various government officials and generals protesting that these actions were destroying the sense of national community that was so much a part of Nazi propaganda. He went on, the actions continued, and what I have long foreseen and last Sunday predicted is coming to pass. We are standing before the ruins of the national community, which has been recklessly destroyed in these days. I forcefully explained to the president of the administration, the ministers, the head of the army, how the acts of force against respected German men, how this harshness to defenseless German women, which is a mockery of all chivalry and can only spring from a hatred of the Christian religion and of the Catholic Church, how these machinations have the same effect on the national community as sabotage and bombs. National community, with the men who hound our religious, our brothers and sisters out of the province like wild animals, without any legal basis, without an inquiry into the facts, without an opportunity of defense or the judgment of a court? No. With them and with all those responsible, a community of feeling and thought is no longer possible for me. I will not hate them. I wish from the heart that they come to their senses and convert. So, for example, I immediately sent up a prayer to heaven for the soul of Ministerial Director Roth, who died suddenly on July 5th. He was a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Munich, who for several years, without permission and against the will of his bishop, was an official of the Imperial Ministry for Church Affairs, and prepared and signed many documents for the minister, Karl, encroaching upon the rights of the Church and insulting the honor of the Church. Now he has been involved in an accident while on a boating trip on the Inn, and he drowned in the torrent. May God be merciful to his poor soul. Thus, following the command of the Savior, do we desire to pray for all who persecute and slander us. However, as long as they do not change, as long as they continue to rob the innocent, to throw them out of the province, to incarcerate them, for so long, I refuse to have any kind of community with them. No, the unity of convictions and endeavors of our nation has been contrary to our will, and despite our warnings, incurably destroyed. I cannot imagine that our old established townspeople and farmers, artisans and laborers, our women, your fathers, brothers and sons who now risk their lives on the front for Germany, will nurture any community of opinion with those who persecute our religious and expel them. We will obey them insofar as they pass on orders to us as representatives of the lawful authority. But a community of convictions, a sense of inner solidarity with these persecutors of the Church, these invaders of religious houses, who expel defenseless women and girls, the children of our best families, our sisters, from their conventual homes, many of whom have lived there for decades in work and prayer, doing nothing but good for our people, that is impossible for us. I should feel ashamed before God and before you. I should feel ashamed before our noble German forefathers, before my own blessed chivalric father, who admonished, instructed, and guided my brothers and me with strict earnestness to show the most delicate respect to every woman or girl, to afford chivalrous protection to all the unjustly oppressed, particularly to those who, as women, are the images of our own mother, and indeed of the beloved Mother of God herself in heaven. If I had any community with those who drive defenseless women out of house and home, and drive them out of their country without shelter and without means of support. Bishop von Galen repeated his warning of the previous week. The actions of the Gestapo were destroying the sense of justice and any sense of trust in the leadership of the country. But this did not lead him to call for revolution. To be sure, he said, we Christians do not make revolutions. We will remain loyal to our duty in obedience to God, out of love for our German nation and fatherland. Our soldiers will fight and die for Germany, but not for those men who wound our hearts and besmirch the name of Germany before God and our fellow men by their cruel proceedings against our religious, our brothers and sisters. We will continue to fight bravely against the external enemy, but against the enemy within, who torments and strikes us, we cannot fight with weapons. There remains only one means of fighting for us: strong, stubborn, tough resistance. And this idea of resistance led to his most enduring image, that of the anvil. Be tough, he repeated. Keep steadfast. At present, we are not the hammer, but the anvil. Others, most of them strangers to our way of life or rebels against it, are hammering on us, are trying by violent means to reform our nation, ourselves, our youth, to bend us away from the straightforward relationship to God. We are the anvil and not the hammer. But take a look in the blacksmith's shop. Ask the smith and let him tell you. The anvil cannot hit back and doesn't have to. It only has to be firm and hard. If it is sufficiently tough, firm, hard, then usually the anvil lasts longer than the hammer. No matter how vehemently the hammer strikes, the anvil stands in peaceful firmness and will long serve to form that which is being forged. And further on, we are at present the anvil, not the hammer. Stay strong and firm and unshakable, as the anvil does under all the blows that rain down upon it. In most loyal service for people and fatherland, but also always ready in the face of the highest sacrifices to act according to the saying, one must obey God rather than men. God speaks to every one of us through the voice of conscience, informed by faith. Always obey unquestioningly the voice of conscience. Take as your example and model that Prussian justice minister of old times. I have spoken of him once before, of whom King Frederick the Great demanded that he should overturn and annul a lawful judgment in order to satisfy the wishes of the monarch. This genuine nobleman, Herr von Munchausen, gave this splendid answer to his king: "My head is at your majesty's disposal, but not my conscience." By this he meant to say, I am ready to die for my king. Yes, I will even accept death from the public executioner. My head belongs to the king, not my conscience. That belongs to God. Is the race of such noblemen who think and act in this way, are Prussian civil servants of this kind, extinct? Are there no more city folk and farmers, artisans and workers with that same strength of conscience and noble courage? I cannot, I will not believe that. And therefore, once more, become strong, become firm, remain immovable like the anvil under the hammer's blows. It may happen that obedience to God, fidelity to conscience, may cost me or you our life, our freedom, our home. However, better to die than to sin. May God's grace, without which we can do nothing, give you and me this immovable firmness and preserve it within us. Clemens August von Galen became known as the Lion of Münster because of his courage and the clarity of his thought in defense of human rights, and for the brilliance of his rhetoric. The funny thing was, before he became a bishop, he had a reputation for not being a good preacher. He used to joke among family and friends about how he could put people to sleep from the pulpit. There was a story that when he was a parish priest and the Diocese of Münster was waiting for a new bishop, he was giving a catechism lesson about the qualities a bishop should have. And to see whether they were understanding his lesson, he asked the children whether he could possibly be made a bishop. One child said no. And when asked why, said, "Because my father says you totally can't preach." A cousin of his said the same thing when he heard in 1933 that Clemens August had been named bishop. And then when he heard him preach, he exclaimed, "The Holy Spirit has come upon him." Surprisingly, the Gestapo did not come after him. After he delivered the first sermon, he gave a typescript of the text to his secretary and told him to give it to the Gestapo if they came and demanded it, but they never did. The bishop had already made 2 carbon copies and put them in a safe place. His secretary lent the original to another priest who copied it, and soon people all over were risking their freedom by making copies of the sermon and distributing them surreptitiously. I met a woman in Münster who, as a 16-year-old girl, had worked as a typist in a lawyer's office. Her employer brought copies of the sermons to the office, and she typed them onto mimeograph paper, making multiple copies. Then she went into the streets to distribute them while she was collecting money for a charity. When she felt that the people she encountered were not likely to betray her to the Gestapo, she would slip them an envelope containing a copy of one or another of the bishop's sermons. Other people left copies in public places, or mailed them to random addresses found in the telephone book, when there were telephone books. This way they went all around Germany, including to soldiers at the front. You may know the story of those heroic students in Munich, Hans and Sophie Scholl and their friends, who distributed pamphlets attacking the regime under the name the White Rose. A key to their activity was when Hans Scholl found a copy of one of Bishop von Galen's sermons in his mailbox. He said to himself, "We must get a duplicating machine." Eventually, the texts came into the hands of the British, who printed thousands of copies and dropped them from airplanes all over the country. 2 weeks after the Anvil sermon came the Euthanasia Sermon. For years, the regime had spread the propaganda that some lives are not worth living. People with severe mental illness or disabilities were said to have a life unworthy of life and were a drain on the national economy and strength and should be put to death by euthanasia. And by this time, the practice of euthanasia was secretly being carried out. Patients would be transferred to an institution in another part of the country, and soon the next of kin would receive a notice that the patient had died and been cremated, and the ashes could be picked up. Everyone was sure that they were being killed. The practice had begun in other parts of Germany, but it had just started that patients in Münster were being transported. The bishop announced that he had reported this to the public prosecutor and to the chief of police. He was doing his duty. The criminal code required that anyone who knew of a plot to kill someone must report this to the police. He demanded that the police protect those innocent persons from murder and inform him of what steps they were taking, but he had had no reply. This led to one of the greatest pro-life sermons of all time. Already on the 26th of July, I had made a most earnest appeal to the provincial administration of the province of Westphalia, which is responsible for these institutions, to which the sick are sent for care and healing. It was no use. The first transport of innocent victims condemned to death has gone from Marienthal. And I have heard that 800 patients have been transported from the Institute for Care and Healing of Warstein. So we must assume that these poor, defenseless, sick people will sooner or later be killed. Why? Not because they have committed a capital crime. Not because they have attacked their caregivers in such wise that these were left with no recourse to save their own lives in self-defense, other than the use of violence against their attackers. These would be cases in which, in addition to the killing of armed enemies in a just war, the use of force, even to the extent of killing, is allowed and, not rarely, required. No, not for such reasons do these unfortunate sick people have to die, but rather because, according to the judgment of some official, according to the opinion of some commission, they have become unworthy of life. Because according to this opinion, they belong to the category of unproductive fellow countrymen. It is judged that they can no longer produce goods. They are like an old machine that does not work anymore. They are like an old horse that has become incurably lame. They are like a cow that no longer gives milk. What does one do with such old machines? They are scrapped. What does one do with a lame horse or an unproductive cow? No, I will not continue this comparison to the end, so frightful is its appropriateness and its illuminating power. We are not dealing with machines or horses or cows which are created in order to serve man, to produce goods for him. One may destroy or kill such beings when they no longer fulfill this purpose. No, we are dealing here with people, our fellow human beings, our brothers and sisters, poor people, sick people, unproductive people, granted. But does this mean that they have lost the right to life? Do you, do I, have the right to life only so long as we are productive? Only so long as others acknowledge that we are productive? If that principle is accepted and made use of, that one can kill unproductive people, then woe to us all when we become old and weak. If one can kill unproductive people, then woe to the disabled who have sacrificed their health or their limbs in the process of production. If unproductive people can be disposed of by violent means, then woe to our brave soldiers who return to their homeland severely wounded, as cripples, as invalids. Once it is granted that people have the right to kill unproductive fellow human beings, even if at the moment it affects only the poor, defenseless, mentally ill, then in principle, the right has been given to murder all unproductive people, the incurably ill, the cripples who are unable to work, those who have become incapacitated because of work or war. Then the right has been given to murder all of us once we become weak with age and therefore unproductive. All that will be required is for some secret order to come down, that the process which has been tested on the mentally ill should now be extended to other unproductive people, to those with incurable lung disease, to the infirm elderly, to the severely wounded soldiers. Then the life of none of us is safe. Some commission can put him on the list of the unproductive who are, according to its judgment, unworthy of life. And no policeman will protect him, and no court will take notice of his murder and subject the murderers to the prescribed punishment. Who will then be able to trust his doctor? Perhaps he will report the patient as unproductive and receive the order to kill him. It is unthinkable what degeneration of morals, what universal mistrust will find its way even into the family if this frightening doctrine is tolerated, taken up, and followed. Woe to humanity. Woe to our German people. If the holy commandment of God, thou shalt not kill, which the Lord gave on Sinai amid thunder and lightning, which God the Creator wrote into the conscience of man from the beginning, is not only broken, but if this breach is tolerated and taken up as a regular practice without punishment. I will give you an example of what is now taking place. In Marienthal, there was a man of about 55 years of age, a farmer from a rural community of the Münsterland. I could give you his name, who has suffered for several years from a mental illness, and so was entrusted to the Provincial Health and Care Center of Marienthal for care. He was not totally insane. He could receive visits and was always happy when his relatives came. 14 days ago, he received a visit from his wife and one of his sons, a soldier on leave from the front. The son is very close to his sick father, so the goodbye was hard. Who knows whether the son will return alive from the war to see his father again? For he could fall while fighting for his people. No, the son, the soldier, will surely not see his father again on this earth, because the father's name has in the meantime been placed on the list of the unproductive. A relative who wanted to visit the father this week in Marienthal was sent away with the news that the sick man, on orders from the Ministry of National Defense, has been moved. No one could answer the question, where to? The relatives, he was told, will be given news within a few days. What will the news be? Will it be again, as it has been in other cases, that the man has died, that his body has been cremated, that his ashes can be released in exchange for the payment of a fee? Thus, the soldier who was in the field putting his life on the line for his fellow Germans will not see his father again on earth, because fellow Germans at home have put his father to death. These are facts I am giving you. I can give you the name of the sick man and those of his wife and his son, the soldier, and the place where they live. Thou shalt not kill. God wrote this commandment in the conscience of man long before any book of criminal laws prescribed a punishment for murder, long before any prosecutor accused or any court punished someone for murder. Cain, who slew his brother Abel, was a murderer long before there were states and courts, and he confessed under the pressure of the witness of his conscience, "My sin is so great that I cannot find forgiveness. Anyone who finds me will kill me, the murderer." Thou shalt not kill. This commandment of God, the one Lord who has the right to decide life and death, was written into the hearts of men from the beginning, long before God gave his commandments to the children of Israel on Mount Sinai, in those brief sentences carved in stone that are written for us in Holy Scripture, in those commandments that we learn by heart from the Catechism as children. The bishop continued his sermon with a discussion of how all the 10 commandments had been broken in Germany for years. The text of the gospel for that day was Jesus weeping over Jerusalem because her people had forgotten the things that make for peace. Von Galen asked whether Jesus had also been weeping over Münster, over Westphalia, over all of Germany, and whether Germany was losing God's blessing because of her rejection of him and his commandments. The public outcry after this sermon was so great that for a time the regime halted the euthanasia project. But evil has its ways, and it came back in a quieter way, and the tools that were developed for its implementation were used against the Jews. Blessed Clemens August might have used that motto of Mother Teresa: "The Lord does not ask us to be successful, he asks us to be faithful." Now, why did the Gestapo not come after him? The answer was that they sought guidance from their superiors. Replies came from Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann, both of whom argued that because of his great popularity, this was not the time. Goebbels thought that if action were taken against him, the effects on public opinion would be too great. The regime would have to write off Münster and perhaps all of Westphalia for the war effort. But they would go after him when they had won the war. And remember, they were winning. Revenge, said Goebbels, is a dish best served cold. But we should look at what von Galen's popularity means. It means that the people of his diocese, not just the priests and religious, but the fathers and mothers of families, had been heeding his teaching for years, and the teaching of his predecessors before him. The Münsterland was a place of strong Catholic faith and identity. For 8 years, since he had become bishop a few months after Hitler took power, he had been pointing out to them the dangers of Nazi Party propaganda, that it was attacking their Catholic faith, attacking the family, and attacking the dignity of the human person. Over and over again, he urged parents of their sacred duty to keep a careful watch over what their children were being taught in school and through the other sources of propaganda that sought to form their souls. To counter those influences by a good education in the home, to reject the elements of party ideology that would separate children from their parents and would separate everyone from faithfulness to God and to the Holy Catholic Church, to make of their home a true domestic church, a place of prayer and mutual charity and loving sacrifices offered in union with the holy sacrifice of the Mass, a place where the faith is known and studied and loved and practiced. This leads me to the promise in the title of this lecture, the lessons Blessed Clemens August von Galen has for us today. The Nazis did not begin by killing 6 million Jews. They began with propaganda for an ideology that said that one race had superiority over others, an ideology that said that some people have the right over the life and death of others, an ideology that said that morality is the will of the stronger. Whatever serves the German people, the German race, is morally right. An ideology that marginalized the Christian faith from the public square or simply ridiculed Christians for not being with the times. Blessed Clemens August fought against that ideology from the time he became bishop in 1933. The parallels today are not complete, but we do face a propaganda that marginalizes Christians from the public square. We do face a widespread anti-faith, anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, anti-life propaganda, propagated not primarily by the government, but by the popular culture, the media, the social media, the educational establishment. It's the culture of death, the culture of abortion and euthanasia, combined with the culture of the degradation of sexuality, and all of this combined with an enormous intolerance and prohibition of alternative viewpoints. totalitarianism can take many forms. And it seems to me that we can learn from those who have had to fight against any form of totalitarianism. I can't give you a recipe like the previous Gaffone lecturers. In culinary matters, my expertise is more at the consumer end. Perhaps I can use a basketball analogy. In preparing for a game, we need first of all to work on the fundamentals: dribbling, passing, shooting, setting screens, playing defense, rebounding, drilling our plays, knowing our defensive schemes, instilling a style of play, practicing over and over. Then we need to prepare for the specific opponent, scouting their strengths and weaknesses, developing a game plan. Then there's game day, executing that plan with grit and determination and intelligence and the ability to adapt to the situation. And perhaps we can apply this to the church's encounter with the world, and particularly when aspects of the world are leaning toward totalitarianism. First, we need to work on the fundamentals. The Lion of Münster teaches us to know our faith. This goes back to his brutal Catholicism. Clemens August von Galen was not a great scholar, but from his family he had a firm grounding in the Catholic intellectual tradition. His mother taught him his catechism so thoroughly that he said he didn't learn anything new until he studied theology. His father, who was a member of the Reichstag, the parliament in Berlin, led discussions when he was at home on how to bring social and political questions back to first principles. This background enabled Blessed Clemens August to see clearly the truths that were being attacked by Nazi propaganda: the truth of the dignity of the human person, the right to life, the primacy of justice for a political order. The church's encounter with the world has to involve speaking the truth to the world. So then there is the game planning, which involves knowing the specific opponent. Von Galen kept on top of what was being said by the Nazi leadership and their ideologists and propagandists. This, combined with his background, enabled him to see clearly how that ideology was not only against the church and her institutions, but against the truth and against the dignity of the human person. The game planning involves finding the right time and the right strategy for opposing these falsehoods. One lesson that he gave to his priests very early in the Nazi period is, I think, worth keeping in mind. He encouraged them always, first of all, to give the positive teaching of the truth, and only then to attack errors. And he further encouraged them not to attack the person, but the error. Finally comes the execution of the game plan. For Bishop von Galen, this is speaking the truth with courage and conviction. The sermons I have quoted give some examples of how to do this with the best rhetorical effect. But doing this with courage goes back once again to his brutal Catholicism. It was not only his learning, but his deep devotion, his prayer life, his sacramental life, his devotion to the Mother of God that made him a saint and gave him the courage to speak. What he taught his people, he practiced himself: death rather than sin. My head belongs to the king, but not my conscience. When we're involved in a struggle, whether it's a basketball game or something much more fundamental, we are inspired by those who have engaged in such struggles before us at a high level. Blessed Clemens August von Galen, the Lion of Münster, can be an inspiration for us to speak the truth with courage. Back in 1933, when he chose the motto for his episcopal coat of arms, he chose the phrase, "Nec laudibus, nec timore," neither by praises nor by fear, by which he meant neither the praises of men nor the fear of men should deflect us from our fidelity to Christ. Because he grew up in such a brutally Catholic home, where the faith was both practiced and studied, he had the clarity of thought to see through the party ideology and the courage to speak the truth. Because many of the families of his diocese also had such homes, and because Catholic priests and sisters and teachers and professors followed his example in leadership, many of the people of his diocese were able to stand with him. He himself said in his last public address, when he came back to Münster as a cardinal, that this is what gave him courage and also protected him from what could have been his fate, but perhaps also his greatest gift, the crown of martyrdom. We cannot know whether the crown of martyrdom will be the fate and the gift of some of us, but we can strive to follow Blessed Clemens August von Galen in having the courage to speak the truth and to refuse to do evil. May we also be so filled with courage that neither praises nor fear will deflect us from the following of Christ.